The South Pacific was a very dangerous place to be during World War II, and that's exactly where the Native Americans were. The Code Talkers were Native Americans who were part of the Marine Corps that the United States Army used as communicators to each other because no one could understand their language behind enemy lines. The Native American Code Talkers were located in the South Pacific, in the middle of combat. Their language was very useful in the war because it was so hard for enemies to decipher and figure out what they were saying.
Part of what made the Navajo language so successful in the war efforts is that the language was so very complex. They actually made the language, they took the Navajo language itself and then added new vocabulary to it so that those who were familiar with the Navajo language could not even understand it if they were not part of the war efforts, if they weren't these code talkers.
And as shown here, the South Pacific was a very dangerous place to be. In the war, Native Americans were not solely used as code talkers, but also as people in combat because they were very skilled fighters.
What made the Navajo code so effective was its extreme complexity. Some words had direct translations. For example, if you wanted to say smoke, you would say lit, which directly translates to smoke. However, many of the words involved a little bit more decoding. If you were trying to say company, you would say nakia, which is the Navajo word for Mexican. And if you wanted to say Africa, you would say Jinni, which literally translates to blackies.
The Native American code talkers also had very advanced sketches and diagrams that they used during the war that the enemies had impossible times decoding, such as these shown here.
Navajo code was based off of the Joint Army-Navy phonetic alphabet that uses agreed upon English words to represent letters, but unless you were a Navajo speaker, if you listen to the codes, all you would hear is a bunch of disjointed strings of individual and unrelated nouns and verbs.
The war had a large impact on Indians on the reservation. There was a draft for young men, and the jobs paid well in other cities. The men who were drafted served in integrated units where for the first time they were exposed to other backgrounds. In 1945, the U.S. Indian Commissioner said that the war caused the greatest disruption of Indian life since the beginning of the reservation, because the increase in contact with the outside world of the reservation had brought many changes to their culture. The Navajo Code was created at Camp Pendleton in California. It was assembled in 1942 by the first 29 Navajo recruits who were attending boot camp in Camp Pendleton, California.
Philip Johnson was the idea behind using Navajos as code talkers. He was a war veteran from World War I, and he was the son of a Navajo missionary, and he actually lived on the Navajo reservation, but he wasn't actually a Navajo, but he was nonetheless very fluent with the Navajo language. The idea behind the Navajos and using their language as a way to progress in combat first evolved after Philip Johnston heard a story about how 8 Choctaw Indians won a battle in Germany because they had used their own language to communicate with the 8 of themselves to send war messages to each other.
The Navajo code talkers were commended for their skill, speed, and accuracy accrued through the war. At Iwo Jima, Major Howard Connor, 5th Marine Division, signal officer, had 6 Navajo code talkers working around the clock during the first few days of the battle. These 6 sent and received over 800 messages, all without error. Connor later stated, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." So as you can see, the Native Americans played a vital role in World War II, in both the code talking and in combat. In 1982, Ronald Reagan gave the Code Talkers a certificate of recognition. He also named August 14th National Navajo Code Talkers Day. The Code Talker Memorial was erected in Window Rock, Arizona, by Navajo Code Talkers Memorial Foundation, Incorporated. Today, many Navajos live in a reservation located in the Four Corners area of the United States and are still recognized for their duty to America during World War II today.